Hi everyone. Today you're going to learn about eutrophication. Now this is a long, scary word, so let's practice saying this word. The EU is pronounced U. Then tro, the PHI sounds like F, the CA sounds like K, and the TION is like shun. Eutrophication. Now you practice saying it. Eutrophication is when too many nutrients enter a body of water and cause unnatural growth of algae or other plants. So this can happen in a lake, a pond, a river, and the ocean. Algae, like you've probably seen before, are the little green plants that you see at the top of water. Now, what do we mean by nutrients? Well, before we answer that, look at these two different ecosystems. Here, you have a healthy ecosystem. On this side is an unhealthy ecosystem. And here it says eutrophic ecosystem. And you're going to learn what that really means. Now, what are the differences that you see here that might lead to this being healthy and this being unhealthy? So, when we say nutrients, we mean nitrogen and phosphorus. In these two pictures, you see both of those. The N means nitrogen, and the P means phosphorus. Well, these two nutrients are in both ecosystems, and this one's healthy. So what you see here is that nitrogen and phosphorus, they're natural, and they're usually not toxic in the amounts naturally found in ecosystems. So here we see it's healthy, the fish are doing fine, and so are the plants. However, in this picture, the water seems murky and the plants and animals are not doing so well. And that's because there's too much nitrogen and phosphorus. And you can see that because these circles are bigger. So too much nitrogen and phosphorus can be toxic. Now we're going to learn about where these come from. Farmers usually use fertilizer, like you've probably seen in bags like this, containing nutrients like nitrogen and phosphorus, and these nutrients help plants grow. So farmers like to use this because why wouldn't you want your crops to grow faster and better? However, the nutrients go into the soil and then it rains. These nutrients in the soil become part of runoff. Now think back to last week when you learned about what runoff means. Where does runoff end up going? So where do you think these nutrients will end up? Well, the nutrients, nitrogen and phosphorus, are now in lakes and other bodies of water. And these nutrients cause quick growth of algae. And like we said earlier, algae are going to be the plants that you see in the bodies of water on top. However, this quick growth of algae is called algae blooms. So here you see an algae bloom, which is a lot of algae taking over the top of the body of water. The algae blooms block the sunlight underneath them and keep other plants from using photosynthesis. So underneath these plants are other plants in the water. And like you learned in Unit 1, plants need sunlight in order to do photosynthesis and grow. So with all these algae blooms, it's not a good situation for other plants. And then when all the nutrients are used, the algae die and sink to the bottom, like you see here. And when they die, they decompose. Bacteria use oxygen to help the process of decomposition of the algae. Now, decomposition, like you see here with the apples, is what happens to all living things, plants and animals, when they die. So they break down, and then they become part of their environment, right? So here's a apple that you'd be likely to eat, but then if it's not eaten, it's going to decompose, like you see here. This happens to the algae too. And in this process, the bacteria need oxygen. So what's going to happen if there's a lot of algae from the algae blooms dying and then decomposing? What's going to happen to the amount of oxygen? Well, when the oxygen is being used, this means there isn't enough oxygen for marine animals. So just like animals on land, animals in water also need oxygen. But if the bacteria is using a lot of it to decompose this algae, there isn't enough. So with little oxygen, the fish and other animals die. And then when they die, they're going to decompose, so bacteria need oxygen for this process, and this leads to even less oxygen. So this whole thing is the process of eutrophication. When the nutrients from farming with fertilizers, when too much enters water, you get an overgrowth of algae called algae blooms. When the algae decompose the bottom of the water, a lot of oxygen is used and there's less available oxygen for marine life. So this can harm them and even lead to their death.